Hello. Do you feel like your garden is a bit slow to get going and get growing this year? I'm Liz Zorab and this is Byther Farm. This weekend I went to visit Zorab from Sow, Grow and Cook.
I actually grow on roughly a plot of 60 by 100 feet, and we've got 2 polytunnels that we grow quite intensively in, and I try to grow things throughout the year, so we've always got something we can pick and eat.
And we had a chat about how our gardens are progressing this year and how they seem to be much more slow to get growing than we had anticipated they might. And so here's Saron to tell us a little bit about what's going on in her garden.
The weather has been really cold and wet and very windy and stormy throughout the winter. We've had about 4 or 5 storms this part of Wales, which did quite a lot of damage to our duck pen and other things. But then we came to about March time and we had a very dry, calm, relatively mild spell, which I think fooled me and quite a lot of other people into thinking it's a great time to plant. Because, you know, we're all fed up with the winter by that stage and we want to get going. But actually, it was still really cold out, and I think the ground was quite cold as well and not warmed up sufficiently. So I think things probably weren't ready to go into the ground at that stage. I did start off tomatoes and aubergines and peppers in the greenhouse, thinking that by May things should be ready to go outdoors or in the polytunnel, but even still things had not really warmed up enough or dried out enough in some parts of the garden. Now I've got several beds of potatoes growing, but one thing I've observed over the last couple of years is that because we're on a slight slope, I think we must have a bit of a frost pocket in this garden, because this bed of potatoes has been frosted recently. We're in mid-June and this is very recent frost damage. It looks quite burnt. And it can only be frost damage because it's the same exact compost as the other beds and they're doing really well further up. But I'm going to have to think more about this in future years and not plant things that can be affected by frost. So maybe just have a rethink about what I put in these lower sections, maybe more frost tolerant plants. Having said that, these will recuperate, and in fact they're doing fine. Potatoes do recover. I mean, if you think about all the potatoes that you accidentally leave behind in the ground, they're always re-sprouting in the spring, having sat there during the coldest of winters. So potatoes do survive. I'm a little bit disheartened that things aren't growing as well as they should by the middle of June. I like to think that when I planted these out, these runner beans, the first week of June, that we were free of frost and that the weather had settled. But no sooner had I put them in than we had windy weather and we had some really chilly nights. So things are not looking spectacular. They look a little bit windblown, but I'm hoping that they're just going to get on growing, and in time they're going to flourish and I'm going to get a good harvest. So outside I've got a couple of rows of sweet corn growing. They were planted in early June and they are not doing anything like as well as the ones in the polytunnel. They look a bit windblown, slightly shredded, and struggling to kind of get a good footing. And in the polytunnel, I've got the same variety of sweet corn growing. Okay, these were planted about a week to 10 days before the ones outside. Nonetheless, they're probably twice, if not 3 times the height. And obviously that's to do with the shelter and the different climate of the polytunnel. But these are growing really lushly. And it's not that the soil outside is much poorer. It's not. It's got plenty of compost and goat bedding manure, and same as what's in here. So it's got to be the temperatures. So as soon as we get the warmth, I'm pretty sure that the other ones outside are going to catch up. The peas were planted the same time as the sweet corn, and they're obviously a cooler weather crop, and they don't seem to have been affected very much at all by the wind or the chilly nights. They're just growing steadily. Now next to them are some purple climbing beans, and to me they're looking decidedly tatty. They've got a little bit of slug damage, and they're looking, to me, a bit yellowy and undernourished. I don't feel they're thriving, but they are growing.
And just like Saron, my beans are looking quite yellow, so they are too cold and unable to access the nutrients in the soil. There are plenty of nutrients there, but the roots are unable to get at them when they're just too cold.
And I think once we get a week or so of calm, warm temperatures and a little bit of warm rain, I think they'll put on growth, because that's certainly been the experience I've had in the past. So the broad beans here are doing really, really well, and they've even got quite a lot of bean pods on them. In fact, they're growing so tall, I've had to support them a couple of times in the last week or so, because they just keep shooting up. The polytunnel is great in that even the insect life likes to come in here, because it is like a different climate zone. On windy days, I'm finding bumblebees and honeybees and other pollinators and things in here. They must think this is a great refuge to be in.
Saron talked about observing the areas in her garden that get very frosty. And it's one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing, just coming out and seeing what works well where and what the weather's doing and how the water moves across the land. And since recording that with Saron, she has text messaged me this morning to say she had yet more frost last night, and in the future, rather than planting potatoes in those frost pockets, she's going to look at growing more frost tolerant plants in those areas. So things like brassicas that will put up with quite a lot of frost, she'll be putting those in those lower areas of little frost pockets. Now, I've got some brassicas in here, but I've got to say, pretty much the whole of this veg garden gets the frost and keeps the frost till quite late on in the day. It's a north-facing site, and one of the things that I'm going to have to do is learn to adapt my sowing times over the next few years to ensure that I'm sowing things a little bit later so I can then plant them out a little bit later. And as Saron has said, and I want to try and reassure you, most things will catch up. One of the other things I wonder about is whether I actually have unrealistic expectations of how much he's going to grow by this point in June. And so I've had a look back at a homestead tour, a garden tour from 2 years ago, because last year we were moving house at this time of year. And we'd had some very dry weather, but it was really still quite cool. Now today I'm in a thermal vest and a t-shirt and my fleece. It hasn't been warm. The sun is just starting to come out now and it is getting warmer, but it's been a chilly morning and we have had a cooler week or so. And if you want to see exactly what was growing in our garden at that point, I'll leave a link on the screen, and if you click on that, it'll take you straight through to that video.